Hello everyone, Tash here and welcome to episode 22 of How to Renovate. And this week we're going to be discussing quite a sensitive subject. It is neighbours. So in this episode we're going to talk about how to deal with neighbours. Now, neighbours can be a really tricky one. Through the many renovations I've done before, I've had honestly some of the worst neighbours and also some of the best. So it really depends on the people you live next door to, your current relationships with them, if any. And it also depends on how your planning application process went. I've found that mostly people don't really love change, and if you are affecting or what you're doing is going to affect even in the slightest way their property or even what they look onto, sometimes even what they just walk by in their streets. I've had situations where not even the neighbours that I'm directly next to have issues with what I'm doing, purely because they have to walk past it on the street. So you might come into situations which seem completely unreasonable that you have to try and deal with, and you have to try and do your best to deal with them and come to a positive outcome. And unfortunately, sometimes you can't come to a positive outcome and things do go sour, but you have to decide if you're going to do what you want to do to improve your home and make it better for your family, or if you are going to bow to your neighbours and not do your project. So it's a really difficult one because it's so personal. Our homes are so personal, and it's never, I think, our intention to upset anyone by improving our own homes, but it sometimes can get really fraught and upsetting when it comes to dealing with neighbours. I'm going to give you some tips in this episode of things you can do that will hopefully resolve things when they come up, or to prevent issues. But unfortunately, I think I also need to say that sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes agreement is not possible, and I think you need to be prepared for that. And hopefully when you've gone through your planning process or after your build project, things can be better, things can be resolved. But I have also had situations where they can't be. So it's something to really think about carefully, how you will approach issues when they come up, how you will deal with them, and how you see the outcome. Okay, so let's get into it. As you probably know by now, everything I teach about renovations falls under my 5-pillar process, and the information in this episode falls under pillar 4, practical management. Let's get into the episode. Okay, so firstly, communicate early and throughout. So I think open communication is a good start to dealing with neighbours. You want to foster kind of an open, respectful communication line with your neighbours from the outset. So way before we built our house here in North London, we'd personally drop notes through all of our future neighbours' doors about where we were at, what we were planning to do, with our email address, with our phone numbers if they wanted to get in touch. So I guess you could do the same if you were planning quite a big renovation project or even a small one. It's, you know, and depending on how you get on with your neighbours, it's nice to let them know what will be happening on their street and that builders will be around and there will be some disruption and some noise and so on. So I think just being upfront, keeping them informed about the scope and the timeline of your renovation, any potential disruptions, and how you plan to mitigate those disruptions, and just kind of communicate really early, and then don't let that drop off once work starts, building work starts. It's really easy to do that because once the construction phase starts, it's kind of all encompassing and you're pulled in so many different directions, so many decisions and answers that are needed from you, that sometimes you forget to inform the neighbours or keep in touch with the neighbours. So I just keep that in mind, that, you know, I think your neighbours will really appreciate that you're keeping them up to date with what's happening. If you can, let them know when the noisy days are going to be or the noisy weeks or what's happening when. I think it just, managing it up front will help to kind of minimize potential conflicts and disruptions later on. It will just kind of keep them on side, I think. So keep those lines of communication open. Then moving on to the next one, which is arrange a clear and open party wall agreement process. So once you've told your neighbours about your planning application, or that you plan to submit a planning application, if it's approved, you will then need to get party wall agreements with your adjoining neighbours. And it's good to get those right so that your neighbour feels like you're taking their concerns into consideration, that you respect their property, because a party wall agreement says that if you cause damage to their property by your works, then you need to pay to put those right. So if your party wall agreement is clear and it makes them feel at ease, it's done well, it's done properly, you've communicated throughout, it just will generally put them at ease and feel a bit more comfortable with your project going ahead. The next one is to establish boundaries and expectations. So this is quite a big one because, I mean, no matter which way you look at it, you will be disrupting your neighbours' daily lives for a short amount of time, or perhaps even a long amount of time, depending on the size of your project. So I think you do need to remember that you need to be considerate and respectful, and you really have to, from the start, establish some boundaries and some expectations. So, you know, agree a construction schedule. And as I talk about all the time in all the episodes, I mean, delays will happen, things will happen where it will go over, but communicate that to your neighbours. And generally here in the UK, there are only certain hours that noisy work can be done per day, and on Saturdays and on bank holiday days. So, but your neighbours might not know that. So lay that out for them. Say, these are the hours that the construction company is allowed to work. We will try our best to let you know when any noisy works are being done so that you can prepare or do what you need to do to avoid those. So you just want to kind of try as much as possible to minimize the disruption to their daily routines, because everyone's quite busy, everyone's kind of stressed out, and you know, if you don't want your daily routine to be upset over and over again without anyone saying anything. So addressing issues or complaints as early as possible, sometimes even before they arise. Sometimes I even ask the builders for the month ahead. I'll say, when do you expect you'll be opening up that doorway, which means they'll be cutting into brick or using a grinder or doing a lot of cutting if they're using electrical saws and flooring or so on. and then I'll just let the neighbour know that some noisy weeks or some noisy days are coming up before it even happens, so they know when to expect it, even if it might not be quite on the exact day I said. I think the fact that you're proactive and you're addressing the issues before the noisy works happen or any disruption happens, generally, if it's a reasonable person, they will appreciate that and they will feel respected. So I think it's really good to kind of preempt those, let your neighbours know, keep those lines of communication open. And, you know, if any issues come up, just work together, try and work collaboratively to an acceptable solution for everybody. Okay, so moving on to the next one, which is incentives and compensation. I mean, you will, I guess, just have to admit that you're disrupting your neighbours' daily lives, and anything that you can do to kind of make that better, as long as they're being reasonable with you as well, is just to offer gestures of goodwill and just appreciation for their patience and their cooperation. Because I mean, I think we've all at one stage or another been on the receiving end of it, and we know how disruptive it can be to have works right next door to you. I mean, right now, as I'm recording this episode, there is a huge renovation happening in the house next door, and I've had to time the recording of this episode quite carefully, and I've also had to buy some equipment to try and muffle out the noise. So because I knew that renovation was happening, I then prepared for it. So a lot of the time we're on the receiving end of that, and I think just generally as good humans, we want to be told that they realise that they are disrupting our lives and they are sorry, and that they would like to offer an apology or a gesture of goodwill or an appreciation. So, I mean, gifts are great. I have gifted so many things over the years to my neighbours: bottles of wine, chocolates, flowers, Christmas presents, hampers. Just, you know, just show that you realise that you are disrupting their lives and that you're sorry and that you appreciate that they are being patient with you. I think it goes a long way, and it kind of mitigates any negative feelings for when towards the project, and also towards you when you eventually move back into your home with your family. And hopefully, you know, things go smoothly and you can still live harmoniously next to one another. But moving on to the next one, which is seek mediation. So this goes right on to the other side of the argument, where I have also been a couple of times, not many times, thank goodness. But with clients and with myself, sometimes it does get to a stage where the neighbour has become so upset at the renovation, and perhaps you've done everything right. You've done everything I've just suggested. You've, you know, tried to warn them about noise. You've tried to give gifts. You've tried to apologise. But sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes there might be something else there that you might not even know what it might be or what the reason is for the person to act that way. But if it gets to a point where it's affecting your project, or your project is being held up, or you've been reported, then there's no other option really but to seek mediation or third-party intervention. So if there are proper conflicts and disputes that cannot be resolved by anything you've tried or by direct communication, then you will need to seek mediation or third-party intervention. So there are third-party services out there that you can hire, you can engage with, and it's their job to find a solution to these things. So, and having a neutral party involved can really help sometimes. I know there are people out there who help particularly with this sort of thing, and sometimes the local authority can be involved, and they will just find a fair solution for everybody, and you can hopefully just move on from there. It will hopefully de-escalate any tensions, and you can come to an agreement. And whether you move on as friends and close neighbours or not, at least everyone can move on from that point. So there are people to help if it gets to that stage. I really hope it doesn't. And I find generally people are quite forgiving, and if you kind of deal with it in the right way, in a respectful way, as we've covered in this episode, really most things can be overcome. So I hope we don't get to that stage, but I really hope the episode's been helpful. This is one of those things that can really sour a relationship and sour the renovation for some people, but I have to say it's quite rare. It's quite rare where it gets quite serious. So I hope it's helpful, and I hope that it's going to give you some tips to kind of act early and prevent it getting to this final stage. But that's it for this episode, everybody, and I hope to see you next week for episode 23 of How to Renovate. See you soon. Bye bye. For more information on my 5-pillar process for successful renovation, you can go directly to southplacestudio.com/pillars, where you'll find an introduction to the process which covers each of the pillars and what they cover. We also have a number of other free renovation resources. Go now to southplacestudio.com/freebies. I have created some amazing freebies for you there. There is one on the process, like we just said. There is one on planning permission. There is one on kitchen design. There is another one on lighting planning. Go and check those out. There's so much free information there to help you with your renovation.